Great, let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people as the caretakers of this unceded and sacred land we reside and organize on today. The Central Coast has been and remains to this day Indigenous land. Chumash leaders and grassroots activists today continue to engage in actions of cultural self-determination and the protection of their ancestral lands. The Fund for Santa Barbara is committed to being active allies in solidarity with the Chumash people, who continue to lead efforts in protecting this land and recognize our shared responsibility as stewards of the land, water, and of all beings. So, jumping into what we'll be covering today, we will go over a brief overview of the fund and share a bit about our capacity building program. We'll go over our funding model and the folks that make the funding decisions. We'll provide an overview of our grant making programs and funding guidelines and priorities. We'll do an in-depth walkthrough of the grant application cycle and timeline, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. By the end, we hope to help you determine whether or not the fund is a good match for your request. And please keep in mind that even if we're not a good match for your grant request, the fund may be able to support you in other ways, which we'll cover during today's presentation. And just as a quick note, if you're here to learn about grant writing in general, this workshop is not going to fill that need, but you can find resources on how to write a grant on our website, or you can set up some one-on-one time with me. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So let's dive into the history of the Fund for Santa Barbara. The fund has been around for over 40 years, and our mission is to advance progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. Our founders were all supporters and activists of different social justice movements who kept seeing a pattern of foundations not supporting their activist-led progressive work. They were unable to find a community-driven foundation that would support their work, so they decided to create it, and thus the fund was born. Next slide. The Fund for Santa Barbara is community-driven in all senses. Unlike most foundations that have a large underwriter or endowment, we fundraise our budget annually and give it out to the community annually. This keeps us in touch with the reality on the ground of what it's like to fundraise. To us, fundraising is organizing. We are unabashedly progressive, and we support projects with a strong social change component. And our funding decisions are truly activist-led. In our model, donors defer funding decisions to activists. Next slide. We advance our progressive mission through these 5 strategies. Grant making, which is what we're best known for and why you're probably here today. But there are other ways that we support groups aside from funding. We build capacity of organizations to help them be bold and effective. We nurture coalitions by being a hub for convening collaborative efforts and serving as a trusted table to convene people and groups for strategy, resource sharing, and inspiration. We influence philanthropy by advocating for more progressive approaches to philanthropy to support community organizing and movement building. And we engage in leadership development so that social justice movements and the progressive philanthropy sector look like the communities we serve: diverse, intergenerational, and values-driven. Next slide. Now, grant making is the most well-known strategy that we use to advance progressive change. However, we also help build capacity of progressive organizations to help them be bold and effective. In addition to our funding, the fund provides a variety of non-monetary resources to support community-based organizations. We host educational workshops, offer direct free consulting, collect and share resources, and maintain a progressive community calendar of relevant events. We offer a variety of free educational workshops. Upcoming, we have a Know Your Rights training for agencies March 19th and April 2nd, which I'm working on getting the details out today, so keep an eye on your inbox. And we're also co-hosting Central Coast Community Organizer Training April 4th through 6th. Registration's open until this Tuesday, March 11th, so highly encourage you to sign up for that. Like I said, you can keep an eye out for upcoming events and opportunities by signing up for our newsletter and checking our website. This tends to be the best way to get those program updates is by being on our newsletter or also on our social medias. We also partner with the Nonprofit Resource Network to share sector-wide resources. And like I mentioned, we also offer free one-on-one consulting services for anything nonprofit related. You can reach out to me directly to schedule time, and I'm always happy to really connect with you about anything, whether that's grant writing, nonprofit strategy building, or really anything else you might have questions around. So we'll go ahead and dive into the grant making, and I'm going to pass it on to Tanya to talk about our grant making program here. Whoops.
Thanks. Sorry, I went all the way back, but grant making. So as Kathleen mentioned, the fund has an activist-led participatory decision-making model that fully empowers the grant-making committee, or GMC, which you may hear me call them, to make the most effective use of the money that we fundraise. And that means that the fund staff and board don't have the authority to make funding decisions, which allows us to be able to provide technical support to applicants. The GMC themselves, they represent the entire region from North County to South County and provide a range of expertise and firsthand knowledge on issues that affect our community. They are community activists who are on the ground doing the work and understand the of, by, and for approach to supporting historically marginalized community members. And most importantly, they are your audience. And we believe that knowing your audience is an important part of writing a successful proposal. If you would like to learn more about them and the work that they do in the community, I encourage you to visit our website and read their bios. And Danielle is actually going to drop the link to that in the chat for you. Yeah. Oh, I keep going backwards. I don't know what's going on today. All right. So to start talking about grant making at the fund, I want to start by providing a brief overview of all of the grant making programs that we have available. The first, and why you're here today, is our single year and multi-year movement building grant programs. The single year movement building grant program is offered annually in the spring with a maximum request of up to $10,000 and the funding term of 12 months. The multi-year movement building grant program is offered annually alongside the movement building grant program cycle, the single year. The maximum request for that is up to $20,000 annually for a duration of 2 years, and the funding term is 24 months, distributed in 2 equal payments annually. We also have the Emerging Needs Grant Program, which is offered year-round until funds are exhausted. The maximum request for that is up to $5,000 unless otherwise approved by staff. And the funding term for this program is 3 months because it's really urgent response, rapid response for urgent needs. Next, we have the Youth Making Change Grant Program, which is offered annually in the fall. The maximum request for that is up to $3,000 for youth-led projects, and the funding term is 6 months. This provides support for youth-led projects, and decisions are made not by our grant-making committee, but by our youth-making change boards who do the same work as the grant-making committee. We encourage you to keep this grant opportunity in mind if your organization has a youth component with the potential for youth-led initiatives. We also have 2 field of interest funding programs, one being the Racial Equity Grant of the County of Santa Barbara, which is offered in collaboration with the county and is typically available in the fall. The maximum request for that is up to $100,000, and this funding program is available specifically for organizations or groups that are addressing racism through anti-racism strategies. And the organizations or groups have to already be doing this work. New initiatives will not be considered, so please keep that in mind. And finally, we have the Nikki Flack Social Housing Fund program. This is for organizations or groups advocating for and actively leading social housing justice campaigns in Santa Barbara County. This can be leading co-op housing, grassroots organizing for progressive housing policy, tenant advocacy, and other innovative housing initiatives. If any of those sound like something you're doing, please contact me and we can talk a little bit more about that. This program is offered year-round until funds are exhausted, and the maximum request for that is up to $5,000. The funding term for this program is 12 months. All of the information regarding our funding programs is available on our website and shared through our email list. And I do encourage you to register using the link that Danielle previously dropped in the chat so that you are in the know of any opportunities that are upcoming. Now, in order to be eligible for any of our funding programs, all applicants must meet our funding guidelines and priorities, which have a recurring theme of advancing systemic social change. And so before I get into those, I'm going to pass it back to Kathleen to talk a little bit more about how the fund defines systemic social change.
Thanks, Tanya. So you've heard us mention that our mission is to advance progressive change and that we support requests with a strong systemic social change component. But what does that mean? At the fund, we define social change as efforts that tackle the root causes of social inequities to alleviate both these disparities and address the underlying conditions that sustain them. Social change is driven by collective action, public mobilization, grassroots movements, legislative reforms, and shifts in societal values, beliefs, and behaviors. These projects with strong social change components work to change the conditions that sustain these structures that disadvantage marginalized groups. Projects focus on things such as challenging and changing systems that perpetuate injustice, transforming institutions, shifting cultural norms, and improving social conditions. The goal is to alter the systems and structures that determine how power, resources, and opportunities are distributed in society. Direct service, in contrast, focuses on addressing immediate needs of the individual or small group using short-term solutions rather than working to change the underlying structures or policies that create those needs. While direct services are critical for providing relief, systems change aims to address the root causes of issues to prevent the need for such services in the future. Social change is driven by collective action, public mobilization, grassroots movements, legislative reforms, and shifts in societal values, beliefs, and behaviors. Systems change involves long-term strategies that target and transform the underlying institutions, systems, and policies by creating conditions that prevent the recurrence of the injustice. Next slide.
Thanks, Kathleen. So now that we've talked about the overarching theme of systems change, we're going to get into the funding guidelines and priorities. So these funding guidelines that you see on the screen are the guidelines that must be met by all applicants in order to apply for funding for any of our funding programs. Your request should address or align with at least one, and strong requests will align with multiple of these. These all tie back to our mission to support systemic social change efforts that address the root causes of social inequities. We invite proposals that actively support anti-discrimination of all types. You do have a list on the screen, but this list is not exhaustive. We invite applications from any group that supports the elimination of all forms of discrimination. Next, actively support marginalized communities to engage in actions that seek to counter social injustice. An example of this would be providing trainings and resources to empower marginalized communities to organize protests or advocate for policy change and raise awareness to affect change on issues that directly affect them. Next is actively work to improve the rights of marginalized workers and their families, and promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. The examples of this would include the Guelaguetza group in Santa Maria, Juneteenth here in Santa Barbara, and the MLK celebrations in Lompoc and Santa Maria, which we've all funded, which we funded in the past, and all of whom help preserve and promote heritage. Next is promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income and disenfranchised communities. And next is promote global peace and organize just policies. Examples include campaigning for fair trade policies, for example, and organizing peace-building initiatives. Next is work on building coalitions to improve environmental justice and address climate change, especially organizing a constituency without access to decision makers. We here at the fund are committed to removing barriers and providing support to grassroots groups working together so that communities most affected and typically excluded from decision making have a voice in shaping policies. Next, we have engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems. We truly do believe that a key component of real change is building a movement. Pooling resources, sharing strategies, and organizing joint campaigns strengthens the collective impact and fosters a unified movement. And we strongly support coalition building and cross-movement solidarity. Next, we have work against community violence and support restorative justice initiatives. And finally, we invite proposals that operate in a democratic manner responsive to and directed by the constituency being served. To us, this means that those directly impacted by injustices are actively involved in the strategy and decision making, ensuring their needs, voices, and priorities guide the direction of the work. Next, we'll go over the funding priorities.
Thanks, Tanya. So the grant making committee uses the funding priorities to guide their proposal review and base their funding assessment and tie this back to our mission. First, they look at adherence to the funding guidelines. They want to know, does this project have the potential to advance movements for social, economic, political, racial, and/or environmental change? They'll prioritize projects with elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition building, or legal strategy. They want to know, does the project address the root causes of the issue? They'll look at access to funding and prioritize grassroots organizing groups that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, and direct action, primarily focusing on systems change work. And they take into consideration whether the nature of the project is so new or controversial that its chances of receiving funding elsewhere are limited. They'll also consider critical timing and need, assessing whether the organization has the necessary resources, skills, and connections to achieve its social change objectives. They'll consider the impact of funds, assessing the clarity, alignment, and effectiveness of the project's budget in relation to its social change objectives and overall sustainability. And finally, they'll consider regional equity, focusing on the fair distribution of resources with consideration of regional disparities. Now that we've talked a bit about what we do fund, let's take a moment to talk about what we do not fund. Here at the Fund for Santa Barbara, we do not fund political campaigns that support a candidate or a political party. However, we do fund C3s and C4s lobbying or advocating for bipartisan ballot measures. We do not fund private interests, we do not fund direct labor organizing, and we also do not provide direct support to individuals. Our motto is change, not charity. We do not fund building improvements or capital ventures such as vehicles, or office equipment such as machines or computers. And lastly, we are unable to fund projects located outside of Santa Barbara County. Now, I'm going to pass it to Danielle to talk about the funding eligibility criteria.
Thank you, Kathleen. So in addition to meeting our funding guidelines and priorities, requests must meet our eligibility criteria, which are on the screen. There are minimum qualifications that all applicants must meet to be eligible for funding from any of our programs. First, as we just covered, applicants must meet the funding guidelines and priorities. Applicants must also have a tax ID if applying as a tax-exempt organization or as a fiscally sponsored organization. If you're applying as an unincorporated group, applicants will need an employer identification number. Applicants must have an organizational bank account or use a fiscal sponsors. And finally, the budget and planned activities must fall within the funding term of your request. We do not fund retroactively. Groups seeking to apply for a multi-year grant must also have a funding history of 3 cycles and more in recent history, and undergo screening and be deemed eligible by staff. If you wish to apply for a multi-year grant, please email us to see if you're eligible. And with that, let's dive into our movement building grant programs.
Thanks, Danielle. So we want to start off by giving you an overview of our cycle process and timeline. We open the request for proposals on February 28th. And next up is an optional draft review, which we'll be covering in the next slide. But for now, note that the deadline to take advantage of this opportunity is March 21st by 5 p.m. The request for proposals closes on March 28th at 11:59 p.m. And we strongly encourage you to submit well before the deadline. Grant decisions will be announced in late July after site visits and deliberations by the grant making committee. And funds will be dispersed in August. The grant award celebration will be on July 30th in Solvang, so save the date. This is a community event and everyone is welcome to attend. Regardless of if you receive funding, we encourage you to come and enjoy and be in community together. This year, we are reimagining our grant reporting to focus on reducing administrative burden and mutual learning. Instead of being required to submit a report, you will attend a facilitated group conversation to share out about the successes and challenges of your grant and organization's work. These conversations will occur in June of next year. The details will be outlined in the grant agreement. And finally, the funding term will conclude at the end of July. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the fund offers an optional draft application review for prospective applicants. To take advantage of this opportunity, you must submit a 1-page maximum summary of your proposal with a list of key organizers and participants, along with a draft of your budget. Again, the deadline to submit this is 5 p.m. on March 21st via email. And we strongly encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity if you're having trouble determining whether your project is a good fit for the fund. Next slide. So what happens after you submit your request for proposals and the grant making committee decides to move forward? Next up are site visits, which are part of our cycle that happen later in the process. The site visit is an informal conversation for the grant making committee to learn more about your request and better understand the impact you seek to make. The grant making committee will determine who will be receiving a site visit. If your project is selected for a visit, a grant making committee member will contact you to set up a time to meet. Each site visit interview team will consist of 2 grant making committee members, 1 fund staff member, and 3 to 4 members from your organization, chosen at your discretion. Now, the term site visit can be misleading. There's absolutely no requirement to have a physical location. All that's needed is a quiet space where you can engage in a conversation with the grant making committee. These site visits can either be virtually on Zoom or in person at a location of your choice. Next, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and Tanya is going to walk you through the grant portal and the grant application itself.
Thanks, Kathleen. Before I do that, though, I did see a question come in the chat about the pre-application review deadline. And I wanted to make sure that the person that asked that question got the full details on the next slide that Kathleen had talked about. So can I just get a thumbs up, or would you like me to go into more detail about this
Yes,
pre-application
we're getting
deadline?
a thumbs up, Tanya.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move on then, and as Kathleen said, we're gonna jump into the grants portal.
Wait,
we do have an entirely,
Tanya?
yeah.
Hang on, just to answer the question in the chat, Julie asked, what does the pre-application review deadline mean? Julie, that's basically an optional proposal review. So if you're having a hard time figuring out if the Fund for Santa Barbara is a good fit, this is time where you can submit a little bit about your project, and then staff members at the fund, so that's usually either Tanya or myself, will review that and basically say, yep, we think this is a great fit. Here are some areas, you know, that you might want to elevate in your proposal, or it may be that we determine, hey, not so much of a great fit. But I really highly encourage folks to take advantage of this. As Tanya and I have shared, since the grant making committee are the ones who make the funding decisions, staff at the Fund for Santa Barbara are able to help advise you on your proposal. So this can be really, really helpful if you're struggling to figure out your social change language, if you know, are not quite sure exactly how to align the work that you're doing with the funding priorities. This can be really, really crucial for helping you get some funding. So yeah, I hope that that clarifies. Thanks, Shakira, for the shout out too. She said it's very helpful and so worth it. I've worked with Shakira and SB Food Action Network on some proposal review stuff, and I love grant writing, so it's really fun for me, honestly. Always happy to chat about your grants, help workshop some language, so really don't hesitate to reach out to us. And the best way to do this is through the optional proposal review. Okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
Tanya, just to address that.
Thank you, Kathleen. And yeah, this is optional, so folks don't actually have to worry about this deadline if they don't feel like this applies to them. The main deadline to focus on is the actual proposal deadline, which is March 28th at 11:59 p.m. Awesome. Okay, let's go to the portal. As I was saying, we do have an entirely electronic grant process, and I'm going to walk through that in a second. But before I do, I wanted to note that to submit a grant application, you will need to create a free submittable account. You can use the email that is linked to the organization or group that you're submitting the request for, and this email will be our primary point of contact with you throughout the life cycle of the grant the process. Note also that our grants platform is not supported by Internet Explorer, so use Safari, Chrome, anything else, avoid using Internet Explorer. I don't know why it doesn't work, but that is the reality of it. Having an entirely electronic process allows you to be able to collaborate with your colleagues in real time. And I'll show you how to do that once we get in there. And then there's also an autosave and a save draft feature that allows you to save drafts and return to them when you're ready to continue. And if you find the application to not be accessible to your specific accessibility needs and would like technical assistance, please email me for support. We want to make sure that the application is accessible for everyone, and we will do our best to support you or connect you to the submittable service team to address your accessibility needs. With that, let's go ahead and jump into the portal. So you all have visited our website grantee portal, and this is where you get rerouted to the application portal. When you click on apply here, you'll be redirected to submittable to our online grants portal. The first thing you'll see is that the fund's mission, funding guidelines and priorities, and eligibility criteria are there, so you can read through them. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you will see the option to apply for any of our current funding opportunities. You can hit apply. And then at this point, if you're not logged in, you will be asked to log in or create an account if you haven't already done so. Once you're logged in, the first thing we'll ask for is your organization using your tax ID or EIN number. Here, I'm going to go ahead and enter the fund's EIN so that you can see what that process looks like. When your organization pops up, you can go ahead and select and continue. And then at this point, if you haven't already done so, it'll ask you to complete a brief eligibility survey. And this, it's very brief, it's like 5 questions. And the main point of it is to ensure that you have a clear understanding of the type of request that the fund supports. So be sure to read through that form really carefully and thoroughly complete it. Any unanswered questions will result in an automatic ineligibility, as the form will not prompt you for missing information and will instead mark you as ineligible. From there, you will be redirected to the application, which is what we're seeing now. You'll see the form name here at the top, as well as the deadline. You'll also notice that the funding guidelines and priorities will always be available to you to help you craft your application. So if there's ever a point where you're going through and drafting your narrative and you need to review the funding guidelines, you can just scroll all the way to the top. Then you'll see the organization that you're applying on behalf of based off the tax ID number that you entered. Here you're seeing the fund's information. And then as you continue to scroll down, you'll see the funding term and a link to the application checklist, which is a tool that we developed to assist you in gathering all the necessary materials that you'll need to submit your application. And on the right, you'll see this little person that with the Manage Collaborators link. This is where you can invite collaborators by adding their email addresses. You can invite as many collaborators as you want, and like I said, they can collaborate with you in real time. The only thing I'll note is that collaborators will not be able to submit the application. Only the originator, the owner of the application, will be able to submit the form. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about inviting collaborators, and who initiates the application is the important part. Collaborators will not be able to submit on your behalf. Moving down, you get into the general information section. And before jumping into that, I wanted to highlight a few helpful details. One of them being that required items are always going to be marked in red. Word counts are going to be displayed on the bottom right corner of the input text box. And clues specific to the information that is being gathered are always going to be in light gray underneath the text box. So pay attention to those clues. They're there to help you craft your narrative, and as well as the word counts. The first section covers general information about the applicant organization and the funding request. And then you'll start with an executive summary, or it starts with an executive summary, but you actually do not have to answer the questions in order. And I actually encourage you to come back to draft this executive summary at the very end. Here, you'll want to be sure that you answer the 4 prompts being asked in paragraph form, not in numbered list form. So you'll see the clue is saying to write in 3rd person present tense paragraph form. Pay attention to those cues. Then we'll get into the primary contact information. This is the form owner's contact information. This should match the information for the contact who initiated the application. Then like I said, this individual will serve as the primary point of contact for all proposal-related communications. Next, we have organization information. Here, you'll want to enter the legal name of your organization or group as it is appears in the IRS exempt organization list. If you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, enter the name of your group not your fiscal sponsor, we'll ask for your fiscal sponsor's name a little bit further down. The request or project name is just asking you to give your request a name. And this can be as simple as, general operating support for the fund, for example. Then we'll ask you if your organization or group is tax exempt. If you are tax exempt, you can say yes, and then follow those prompts. If you are not tax exempt, you can say no, and then we'll ask you if you're applying as a fiscally sponsored organization. If you are, you can say yes, and then move on. It'll ask for the name of the fiscal sponsor and so on. And if you are not tax exempt and not applying with a fiscal sponsor, then you have the option to apply as an unincorporated group. And the tax ID number and EIN field will automatically populate. Where is it? Here it is. Will automatically populate with the number you entered when you started the application. In this case, again, you're seeing the fund's EIN, which I used to initiate the application. Note also that if you are applying as an unincorporated group, there are a couple clues here that pop up specific to unincorporated groups. For the purposes of today, I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm a fiscally sponsored group, and my fiscal sponsor is a 501c3 organization. Then you would include the organization bank account. And this is the name of your organization's bank account, not your bank's name, like not Chase or Bank of America, for example. It's really what the payment would be made out to. And in this case, if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, this would be the fiscal sponsor's bank account name, not your own. And then we do ask for your organization's Bill.com payment network ID, and this is used for electronic funds transfer and direct deposit. If you do not have a Bill.com account, you can leave this blank. And again, if you are a fiscally sponsored group, ask your fiscal sponsor if they have a Bill.com PNI. Then we will get into organization address. We want to know where your organization is located. And if your organization has a separate mailing address, we'll ask you whether or not your organization receives correspondence there. And if you say no, then we'll ask you for the mailing address as well. We'll ask you for your organization phone number, website, and social media. The latter two, as you can tell, are not required. And then finally, if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, will ask you for your fiscal sponsor's address as well and their email. Moving down, we get into the request information section. This is where you'll specify the amount you're requesting and provide additional details about your request. The type of request, you'll need to indicate whether this is a general operating support request that you're submitting, or if it's specific to a program or project. If the request is for general operating support, your total request budget and your organization's annual budget will be the same. Think of your organization as the project that you're requesting funding for. Now, if this is for a specific program or project, then your total request budget would be the budget for that program or project, and then your organization's annual budget will be your organization's budget. And finally, we'll ask you for the start of your organization's fiscal year. Again, this is your organization or groups, not your fiscal sponsors. Moving along, we have the specific issue areas. Oh, Shakira has a question. Yes, Shakira.
Quick question. It might not apply to everybody's, but I hope this is helpful. If your organization is transitioning either during the application or during the review period from a calendar year to a fiscal calendar, so instead of January to December, from July 1st to June 30th, or the other way around, do we just simply let you know during the review period if any changes like that are made?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. You are always welcome to keep us in the loop of whatever's going on, and you can let us know, hey, I submitted it with this information, but this information is currently in transition. And then once that transition has been made, then we give you the option to reopen that application and update it. Good question. Thank you, Shakira. Okay. As I was saying, so the issue areas, this is where you'll pick the top 5 issue areas that your request seeks to address. You can select from the list that is available to you, or you can enter your own by clicking other down here and then entering it here. Here you'll just want to use commas to separate, and you can enter various if they are not already available to you. Similarly, select the top 5 strategies that your request will employ and the top 5 constituency groups that this request supports. And again, I have the other section already clicked out, so you can see that you always have the opportunity to enter your own if what the list has is not reflective of what you are working on. Finally, geography. Geography refers specifically to the location where the work associated with your request will take place. I want to note that this should be realistic and not aspirational. And if you are not working, if the work will not serve the entire constituency of the county, I would refer you to abstain from selecting countywide, but rather select the specific area that the work will be taking place. Further down, we have site visit information. We'll ask if the submitter, the person who is submitting the application, should be the primary point of contact for the site visits. If the answer is yes, you can click yes and move on. If the answer is no, for example, if you're a grant writer, but the program manager should be the person who should be contacted for the site visit, then you can say no, and then tell us who we should contact for the site visit. Similarly, we'll ask for the best days and times for a site visit. As you've heard, the grant making committee is made up of volunteers who have day jobs. And so here we'll ask you to be as flexible as possible and provide a few evening options in addition to daytime options, if that is feasible for you. Remember that these interviews are an opportunity for the grant making committee to learn more about your proposal directly from you in your own words. Finally, we've made it to the narrative portion. For this portion, we want you to be specific and focus on the specific questions that are being asked and provide detailed answers. I encourage you to break down each question and directly address what is being asked and avoid the inclusion of any irrelevant information. Remember that the GMC has to review all of the applications, and you do not want them to have to sift through unnecessary details to understand your request. Your real goal here is to make it easy for them to clearly articulate why they support your proposal. For best practices, I encourage you to use language that non-experts can easily understand and avoid jargon and acronyms. So, the first question will ask you to articulate how the request aligns with the fund's mission, funding guidelines, and priorities, and how it advances your organization's social change strategies and/or efforts in movement or coalition building. Here, you'll want to clearly explain how your request is advancing progressive social change and describe how it aligns with your organization's social change strategies. Excuse me. You'll want to explain how the request contributes to building movements or coalitions, and you'll want to be specific and direct in providing concrete examples to illustrate your points and showing a clear connection between your request and then the fund's mission and priorities. And again, the GMC will prioritize projects with a strong social change component. Next, we'll ask you to outline your proposal and detail your specific request to the fund. Describe the request history, purpose, and objectives, and explain how the request is enhancing community capacity to build and mobilize power. And if you're a reapplicant, we will ask how the funds will help you build on already established grassroots efforts. This is where you'll lay out the foundation for your request, describe the request in detail, highlighting its core components, and provide context for your request, explain how the idea came to be and any previous efforts that led to this proposal. Tell us what problem you are aiming to solve or what change you are hoping to achieve. And explain how the request will build community capacity to address the root causes of issues that you seek to address. And if this request has not previously been funded, then you don't have to worry about that part. But if it has, then show how the work you've already done has laid the foundation for further progress and how the new funds will help deepen and expand those efforts. Next, we'll ask you to briefly describe your organization's history, purpose, and achievements, and outline your organizational structure and governance, including how decisions are made and priorities are set. Here you'll want to provide a brief background of your organization, clarify your organization's core mission and goals, and tell us what your organization is trying to achieve and why it exists. So outline the structure and governance, explaining how decisions are made and priorities set, define your constituency, and explain how they are involved in the decision-making process for this request. Again, the GMC will prioritize projects with community buy-in and partnerships where the constituency is part of the decision-making group. They do not want to see projects where people from the community are not involved. Next, we'll ask you to tell us if and how you are working with other organizations to develop effective networks and maximize impact. Here you'll want to explain if and how you are working with other organizations to create a movement or strengthen collective action, or how your project fosters collaboration and shared goals for social change. If you have an active collaboration agreement with community partners for this request, we'll ask you to identify them by name and describe the partnership. And then again, the GMC will prioritize projects that promote movement building and coalition building. They want to see if and how you're partnering with other organizations doing similar work and not producing duplicative work. I know I'm moving slightly fast, but please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute if any questions arise as we're going through this. This is your time really to ask any questions, and I'm happy to answer them. Next, we'll ask you to provide 2 references who understand your project and can speak to it. And these could be members of your constituency or key stakeholders. Then we'll ask for an activity timeline that includes the month, year, objective, and activity. A good way to differentiate between objective and activity: objective is what you're going to do or hope to accomplish, and the activity is how you're going to do it. The activities should help you achieve your objectives, and the activities and objectives should support the narrative of the proposal. And as you're going through and completing your timeline, you should also be thinking about your budget, because your budget is your activities in a different form. We'll ask you what the anticipated outcomes are and how you will evaluate the effectiveness or impact of the request within your proposed timeline. We'll ask you to tell us who will benefit and how. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you carrying out this request. Clearly outline the specific outcomes that you expect to achieve. Make the outcomes measurable. What is the change that you seek to make? How will you evaluate whether that change took place? Explain how you will evaluate whether your outcomes were achieved, and any methods or tools that you'll use to measure the progress. Evaluation can be simple. It does not have to be elaborate. Clearly clarify who will benefit from the request and detail how the beneficiaries will benefit. Here you'll want to be realistic, clear, and feasible. Next, we'll get into the financial information section. First, we'll ask you to identify the fundraising strategies of your organization for this request and who is responsible for implementing them. Here, describe the methods or approaches that your group or organization uses to raise funds. And keep in mind that the strategy that we're looking for is a specific plan of action to raise funds for the request. Activities are the ways in which the strategies are carried out. Again, be specific. And explain how the strategy contributes to meeting your fundraising goals. We made it to the financial information table, which I flip-flop back and forth between calling it your budget table. So when you hear me say that, I'm referring to the financial information table. This is where you translate your activities, like I said earlier, into dollars. And I recommend maintaining a running sheet as you identify the activities you plan to undertake, detailing the specific requirements and associated costs. The table is divided into 2 sections. The first section is for recording income sources. And then the second section, if you scroll down, is where you'll record you'll list out your expenses. The amount columns, you see I already have some numbers in there. They're set to auto sum, and in order for this functionality to work properly, you must avoid using any special characters. So just keep it simple with the numerical values, and that's it, so that the form is working properly. I have a pre-filled sample for general operating support request that we'll go over together. that is linked inside of the application here so that you will also have access to it after today's recording. Let me zoom in a little bit. So in the income section, as I mentioned, you'll include all monetary funding sources related to the specific request, along with the expected dates for each funding source. The first line in the income section is pre-filled with the fund's information. You'll just need to add the month, year anticipated. In this case will be August 2025. And the amount, it will be the specific amount that you are requesting. For single year applicants, it will not exceed $10,000. So you can see here, this one says December 2022, but we've shifted our timeline a little bit. Remember that this table should only include information directly related to your request. If your request is for a specific program or project, then you'll only include the budget information relevant to that program or project. However, if your request is for general operating support, then you'll include your entire annual organizational budget. The sample that we have here is for general operating support. And so I'm adding my entire organizational budget because the request is for that. Highlighted in yellow at the top, you'll find examples of potential funding sources that you may choose to include up here. In the expenses section down below, you'll include all projected expenses associated with the request. The total sum for the amount requested from the fund must match the amount being requested in your proposal. So this amount here should match this amount here. Oh, I can't highlight just one, but that's the amount that I'm referring to. The sum of the total expense, the sum of the total expenses amount for the request must match the total income in section 1. So this total income amount here must match the total expense amount here. And if those two are matching and balancing out, then this amount verification number down at the bottom will automatically balance out and balance out at 0. Again, highlighted in yellow are examples of possible expense categories that you may choose to include. Now, in the first column, you'll tell us what each expense item is. Add these in order of priority, with the highest priority items being at the top. In the second column, the notes and explanation column, you'll want to make sure that you fully utilize the explanation section by providing the grant making committee with as much detail and a thorough breakdown of each expense as possible. In the third column, you'll tell us how much money you're requesting from the fund for each specific expense. Note that if your total request budget is over $10,000, there may be items listed in your expenses that you are not requesting funding for. For example, here you see this category of operating expenses. It's part of the budget because it is something that needs to be paid for. However, in this case, I'm not requesting any funding from the fund for that. I'm seeking other sources, and that's how much it's going to cost me. Similarly, if there may be items for which you are requesting partial funding with the remaining amount to be secured from other funding sources, such as here in the sample of personnel and category, the category of personnel, you see that the total amount as explained in my explanation is $125,000. However, I'm only requesting $8,000 for this from the fund. And again, in the fourth column, you'll specify the total cost of each expense item, and this amount should match the cost breakdown provided in your explanation here. Are there any questions about the budget currently that I can address before I jump back into the application? Okay, it doesn't seem like there is, but if any do arise, please let me know. Let me check the chat, make sure I haven't missed anything. Cool. All right, so back in the application, again, that sample will be available to you there. These are little hints that I've provided. They match everything I've already said. Remember, the total amount in section 1 must match the total expense amount in section 2. That's this amount here should match this, and if it is, then this will auto balance out at 0. We'll ask you, do the total income and total expense amounts match and balance out at 0? And you'll want to make sure that they do. If they do, you'll say yes and move on. If you say no, it'll actually ask you to go back and re-verify that. And sometimes you're like, but the numbers are right. I don't understand what's going on. It may be that there's like a period or a number sign that was added, and when special characters are included, the math gets wonky, so pay attention to that as well. And then you'll also need to confirm that the total sum amount requested from the fund matches the amount being requested in your proposal. That's this amount here should match the requested amount for the proposal that you're submitting. Finally, with the priorities, we'll ask you to identify the key areas or expenses in your budget that are most critical. And again, add these in order of priority, with the highest priority item being at the top. I know that I asked you to add them in order of priority, but we want to make sure that the GMC truly understands where your priorities lie, and that we're not making any assumptions on your behalf. Finally, we'll ask for any past funding sources. This helps us understand funding trends and share. And so we'll ask you to share any past funding sources for this request. Second to last section is going to be the additional information section. This will differ depending on whether you're applying as a tax-exempt group, a fiscally sponsored group, or an unincorporated group. Use that application checklist that is linked at the beginning of the application to figure out what information you'll need, and have ample time to gather everything that will be required to submit. Excuse me. So first and foremost, all applicants will have to provide a list of key participants involved with their request, and a list of the board of directors for tax-exempt groups or governing body for fiscally sponsored groups and unincorporated groups. Then we'll ask about whether your organization's leadership reflects the community you serve. Remember that the GMC will prioritize requests where the constituency is actively involved in the decision-making process. Fiscally sponsored groups will also need to provide a list of the board of directors of the organization that is acting as a fiscal sponsor. You see that there. Going down, we'll ask you to upload let me backtrack. Tax-exempt and fiscally sponsored groups will be asked to upload a copy of their organization's IRS determination letter and a copy of their State of California Franchise Tax Board determination letter. Don't know what those letters are? We have samples linked for you here. So this is the IRS determination letter sample. And then we also have the State of California Franchise Tax Board determination letter that we're looking for here. If you are applying as an unincorporated group, you will not be asked to upload those two letters since you are not tax exempt, but instead will be asked to upload a statement of charitable purpose for your group. We'll also ask you to upload your organization logo if you have it, and if you do not, don't worry about it. That's okay. This is not a required field. This is just if you have it, we like to have it so that we can promote your work. And finally, you'll have the option to upload an attachment of your choice that will help the grant making committee understand your request better. And because this is electronic now, it doesn't just have to be, a brochure or a flyer. You can really get creative with it. You can upload a link to a video, or a recording of an interview that you did. There's various options, and I encourage you to explore those and take advantage of them, all in the name of helping the grant making committee really understand the work that you're doing. Finally, the disclaimer and agreement section will ask you to certify the information provided in the application, and that it is being submitted with the board of directors' full knowledge and endorsement. So we'll ask you to send an endorsement request to a member of the board of directors. So you'll first complete your section, and then we'll ask you to send the endorsement request to a member of the board of directors, either the president or the treasurer. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, this request will be sent to the president or the treasurer of the organization that is acting as the fiscal sponsor. And if you are an unincorporated group, this request will be sent to a member of the governing body other than yourself. And that's it. At the very bottom, you'll see there's a save draft form. Here you can save drafts at any point. and come back to them if you're not ready to submit. And once all of the information has been completed, then you can go ahead and click apply. And I will note here as well, remember I said at the beginning, you don't have to answer the questions in order. And this request is something that you can send earlier than right at the point of submitting to give the board of director, the director that you're sending it to, enough time to complete this form and get it back to us before the deadline of the application. Let me jump back into here. And we've made it to the Q&A section. So thank you for sticking with me. I know that was a lot of information. I hope it was useful information. And Kathleen and I are here to answer any questions, Danielle as well. But I do want to say thank you for your time. We've made it just a minute over an hour, so I know if some of you have to hop off, I completely understand. I'm going to switch over to the slide so that you have our email addresses. Again, with Kathleen, you'll want to reach out to her with any grant writing and technical assistance questions. And for me specifically, anything that relates to the funding programs and cycle information. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to stick around for questions. I'm going to turn off the recording. But if you have to hop off, I just want to say thank you and appreciate you being here.